Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Dean Remy, a 35-year veteran of life sciences, founder and fundraising strategist. We dive into Dean's view on why diagnostics should be the most investable part of healthcare, how founders can avoid common fundraising mistakes, and the emerging role of high net worth individuals in shaping innovation. Dean also shares his own venture in point-of-care pregnancy testing, highlighting why diagnostics have never been more vital. Welcome, Dean. Thank you for coming on the show this week.
Thank you for having me. Very appreciative.
Good. I've been excited about this because actually the last time we spoke, it felt like we were so sort of in it. We went down rabbit holes about the industry. It felt like it could have been a podcast itself. So we could have just recorded that and put that out. But we've got a great focus today, and your perspective on the industry is a really unique one and one that's such a hot topic at the moment. So I'm excited to get into it. But before we do that, I think it would be awesome if you could sort of give us an intro to yourself, your background, your career, and what you do now.
Yeah, excellent. 35 years in the life science industry. Never a dull moment, that's for sure. Started off back in the early days in diagnostics, in managing clinical laboratories, and was involved in both the governmental and the more traditional hospitals. So, the Mass Pioneers, MGHs, Dana-Farber, but also the VA system for 10 and a half years, and fell in love with more the technology side of it early on. So got out of the general laboratory space and into developing clinical diagnostic systems. At the time, it was Siebert Corning. We became Chiron, and that entity became Bayer Diagnostics, and it's now Siemens. Same with the large scale automation and technologies that supported clinical diagnostics back in the day. But spending years in the tech space, I kind of migrated into the more commercial side, marketing and commercial side of things, and dealing with, say, large-scale corporate accounts, companies that today are now the LabCorps and the Quest of the world today, and then moved more into the biotechnology space, so developing technologies that were used, or are used, I should say, for the disease research and therapeutic discovery spaces. Found that fascinating, and spent many years more focused in the oncology and neuroscience side of things, but also in company launches. I ran my own company also for 6.5 years, and then also worked with, I'll call it friends and family, with their companies, people that I've had the good fortune of engaging with over the years, and helping get some novel and including unicorns off the ground, help them figure out how to hit their data requirements within shorter time frames so they could get their next tranche of funding. So it's been an incredible run. I've also had the good fortune of also not just playing in the life sciences, in, say, the human care of things, but also in the animal side and in the agricultural side. So working with the Monsantos, Syngentas, Dow, DuPont, Pioneers on developing genomic assays and the like. Spent a good number of years also with a company that is both big in the biotechnology side, supporting the similar clients that I just mentioned, as well as big pharmas, from the top 20, but also is a major player in the diagnostics space, and that is LGC. I think they own something like 58 companies today, so it's quite a large entity. I like to tell folks it's the biggest entity that nobody's ever heard of. But it's an interesting play when you can play both in the diagnostics and in the therapeutic or disease research side of things, because there is actually a lot of similarities in both developing the technologies as well as the assays that you are going to utilize to determine, are things going the way that they're supposed to or not. So it's been a very, very interesting pathway for me over the years. Currently, I'm a fractional sort of CCO, COO. I have several of my own companies that I'm helping co-launch with folks that I've been in the industry engaged with for a number of years. But then I also step in and help things with, I'll call it more of the right sizing of companies, and they tend to be biotechs, but also some clinical diagnostics as well. Having played similar roles across major acquisitions by more major firms, getting those acquisitions performing properly. So I enjoy the fractional piece for sure. I find myself in the last couple of years more engaged with trying to help with the fundraisers. And that has been, quite the learning experience for sure. I've typically sat around the table, but, listening to the conversations, from the LPs and or the VCs that are the GPs that are setting up those tables. But now I'm on the other side trying to actively do fundraising. I've small amount in the past for my own company, but today it's full on for about 5 or 6 clients that I'm working with currently right now here in 2025.
Wow. Thanks for that, Dean. So much to unpack there, right?
Yeah, cool. Indeed.
The fractional side of things,
Yeah.
you really enjoy that now. What is it you enjoy about that the most?
I think it's more life science is one of these things that the vast majority of us don't necessarily see us departing from, because I don't know if you want to say it's the nerd side of us, but you're getting that stimulation, that challenge. I feel personally like I've been in college for 35 straight years. Every day I'm learning incredible new things. I'm engaged with some of the most intelligent people on the planet who are passionate and vested in improving the human condition. For me, that is a mission. I can't see myself selling cell phones or things like that. For me, it's much more about mission driven and working with people that are extremely passionate about creating solutions that, like I said, better the human condition. And it's often impassioned, I should say, by personal experiences. Right? I can't tell you how many CEOs and founding members of teams, they launch companies because they lost somebody near and dear to this particular condition or this condition. So for them, they all have a mission statement while they're doing it, and they don't plan on dropping that. They're driven to drive that to success one way or another.
Yeah, really interesting. And I assume with your expertise and a fractional offering, you're so in touch with the forefront of innovation, right? Because that's where a lot of fractional opportunities come from, is we need an expert to come in and really advise here or do something that we just can't do. So it probably keeps you quite engaged in the industry and where it's going and what's happening.
Yeah, you get to do a lot of different things, which is nice. You also get to understand the similarities in launching companies and growing the teams, and whether it's focused on cancer or neuro or glucose challenges, as in diabetes or things like that. A lot of the methodry is quite similar, and the building companies, understanding how that is done and how you move them forward is identical, right? For sure. I mean, each has its own unique challenges when it comes to regulations and things like that. But the nice thing about the fractional piece is that, as well as I do, when most of these companies are getting off the ground, an example would be they don't need a CFO for 40 hours a week. They need a CFO to kind of plug in and do 5 hours of hard work a week, and the other 35, that CFO can be working on other CFO types of engagements with other companies. And it makes these companies lean, allows them to operate more cost effectively than having these full-time FTE, individuals on board on the SLT or leading different parts of the organization.
Yeah, makes sense. And the fractional work you're doing has recently taken a leaning into fundraising
Yeah.
support for a number of companies. Is that something that was intentional by yourself as an offering that you felt was a gap in the industry, or something that the industry is demanding or requiring?
I think it's a little bit of both, but it was also, an area that I wanted to personally explore more of, having seen it from, more of an observational side of things. Previously, I wanted to become much more engaged with it myself personally. So that from that perspective, it's, it's part of learning for myself. But I think the industry also, the changes that are currently being experienced, especially with these companies trying to raise capital right now here in 2025, has almost demanded, fresh new eyes and takes on how to approach fundraising and how to communicate what it is that you're trying to do, and maybe even different ways to build the table of investors on that. So we are exploring different options on how to potentially spin out a new entity or two around that thought process right now. And there are other companies doing that. We know that, but each one's got its pool of contacts in the space. And while I find there are some pretty decent companies that are trying to do that, they tend to be let's say 85 or 90% strong in, say, the investor side, and less so about finding the things that they should be looking at to invest in. And then vice versa. There's pools of individuals looking for funding, and then they, together they don't really have a lot of access to the eyes, from that are holding the capital.
So it's literally a fragmentation, that there's just two sides who need each other but just don't know how to find each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation with a gent that I met just about 2 months ago, and he had raised $250 million to go after the data from 23andMe as an example. Now, his fundraising is been exclusively with the high net worth individuals and funding things that tend to, I'd say, resonate with a legacy that someone wants to leave, right? You're a billionaire, and how are you going to depart this planet? What legacy do you leave behind? So he had for years been a primary fundraiser for like the La Jolla Institute, and then he was asked to come up with 250 million to buy this data set, and he did that in 2 weeks, and my mind was blown on that one. And so we've been having a series of conversations. I said, I'd really love to learn how you do what you do and how you've managed that. I don't want to call it a Rolodex, letting my age up back here, of individuals that, trust the types of things that you bring to the table here. And many of the things that I work on, I would say, would fall into a category of legacy creation, right? If you want to develop a therapeutic for, say, ovarian cancer, there are many, many individual high net worth that would love to fund something because they lost a parent to that, or a sister to that, or an aunt to that. And they would love to find these opportunities, but typically they're also not in the regular pool of, say, a lot of venture capitalists that we're more used to in the life sciences of engaging. So I've been chatting with them as how do we bridge the two, right? Because they are looking for things legacy-wise that they'd like to invest in. Let's be honest, they also still want to make money. And so there is that piece, of being able to say, hey, I'll throw, $1 million here, $5 million here, $10 million here on this one. Can you turn it into 2, 10, or 20 million through, even if it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And because they're already, billionaires, as an example, the time palatability is probably already there, right? It's not like they need to make money right now. It's, they want to make money for sure, but they also want to do invest it in things that are, let's call it legacy creating. So we're trying to marry those two, what I'll call investor populations, in a much more homogeneous way. And I'd like to say, transparent way. of getting information in front of them, because as he said, they're not aware of all the different things that are really available and looking for funding in the life science space. As I've been sharing things, he's like, that's incredible. I'd love to know more about that. And he goes, my individual high net worth would love to know about these things. How do we make this happen, this synergy? So it's things that we're exploring like that. I think that, will resonate really well here in 2025 because things have changed here in North America. And they're changing everywhere, but here in a particular way, and other geographies, I'll say they're changing in different ways.
Yeah. So you're currently involved with 5 or 6 companies, and this is the offering you're making. So you're providing, almost brokering services between company and ability to raise capital. And I think the assumption there, which you've just corrected, is that these companies have this straight line of communication to the people who have the capital, your traditional VCs that may well be, we are a diagnostics VC specifically, we are a VC in this space. And actually what you're trying to do is open up avenues to other capital that is sitting there wanting to be involved, but the two parties just do not have that communication between them, and therefore you're that broker. Am I on the right track? At Alevra Consulting, we focus on DX only, supporting early stage and growth companies achieve their milestones by solving their biggest talent challenges. Have you ever suffered from working with a talent partner who was either life sciences or med tech and dabbling in diagnostics? Or no more? Work with a diagnostics specialist talent partner.
Yeah, that's kind of the role that I'm playing currently here. I'd like to make it a much more, I want to say, professional way of approaching it. So we are looking into different ways of building up the infrastructure and application tools around that. We think there's some really cool ways to do that. I can't really spill it here, but it is something. It is, though we are looking at those types of venues itself. But I mean, the reality is, I still need to raise capital for the existing clients that I have. So for many of them, I have an equity stake in those organizations. Some I get also, some stipend for time allocated towards performing particular roles. Sometimes that role is, getting conversation with investors, but other is, I'm taking a look at their decks. I'm taking a look at their web content. I'm taking a look at their KOL list if they have them. If not, I'll work with them to help find those KOLs to get the organization, a little better reputation that it needs. And when it finally starts getting in front of these eyes of investors, it's got a better pitch.
Yeah.
So
that's super interesting. I don't imagine billionaires are easy to get hold of, Dean.
Yeah.
Is that part of your role, is trying to build a network of new, high wealth potential investors? Because that sounds like an extraordinary task in itself, to try and get access to those types of people who really don't want to be accessed, right?
Yeah, to some extent, they'll typically have secondary contacts within those organizations, and that's why the conversation I mentioned to you was so fascinating with this gentleman, and he's like, I'll introduce you to others that do what I do in different parts of the globe, because we find that in the same way that we say people are the same everywhere. They want a roof over their heads. They want, access to healthcare. They want good education. They want, safety, all these things. No matter where you go, people want those same things. And the situation is still true for whether you're a millionaire or a billionaire, right? They're all looking for the same things, whether they're in, Dubai, or they're in Japan or Switzerland. So being able to have that conversation, or design what a conversation looks like with this gentleman here, and then parlay that to these other groups around the world, how are you guys communicating these opportunities? We can put together portfolios and define those portfolios of potential clients looking for investment right now that might fall into their specific sweet spot, right? Whether it's cancer or neuro, around Alzheimer's or things like that, and create these opportunities for them to kind of get in, and then build the tables. Rather than depending on a standard VC group, the flagships, the pioneers, the Blackstones, the Atlases, but there are probably simpler, more cost-effective ways to do that, and still be able to de-risk those assets as best as possible and define what an ROI might look like for them. And I think there is the flexibility right now to do things differently here in the life science space, whether it's diagnostic or therapeutic or biotech, etc.
Fascinating. So you've touched on this in terms of the current landscape. How does the current landscape compare with regards to raising capital and fundraising compared to, say, 12 months ago and 24 months ago, what we've come from, or even maybe that sort of post-COVID boom that we see? How does the current landscape compare to what we've just come from?
So that's going to depend on the specific area. Therapeutics right now is a challenge. People are, VCs in particular, investors in general, are looking for things to be farther down the line, the same way pharma has been for the last several years before they would get in on investing in a particular asset. They were pushing things down. The goalpole lines just kept moving all the time.
Right.
And that is now true for the venture capitalist. It has moved. I also know many of them are reassessing their algorithms, right? Because those algorithms were built on 2023, adjusted for 2024, and now they need to adjust them significantly for what's happening here in North America here in 2025. So they're also, while there are funds still being built today, and even significant funds, there is a risk aversion there. And, that is quite clear because investments come from investors, and those investors are all bringing to the table their own risk adversements, right? And, if they raise a lot of their capital and their value through the public markets, right now the confidence is not there in the public market space. Especially with the tariffs and the we'll call it the stressing of our international relationships and such. So that is right now a huge challenge. However, I think there are a few areas where we see more demand, while it's not broad spectrum. It tends to be quite focused in specific areas, right? So early stage, companies like we'll call it like AI derived drug discovery, still quite amount of people looking for investments in this spare. Point of care testing, we're still seeing a larger drive to grow this specific sector. IVD, in vitro diagnostics, has dropped probably by about a quarter, I think, since this time last year. And not only is the total amount dropped, but the numbers of rounds raised has dropped precipitously in the last year. So while we think diagnostics as a whole will do better, specific parts of diagnostic are going to have, some are going to be more challenged, some will actually see probably overall growth in those specific arenas. So that's definitely one area that I'm paying a lot of attention to. But the POC I think is definitely key for one of the companies that I'm kicking off myself. That is Motiva Diagnostics. We're developing, just because I didn't mention it previously, we're developing a pregnancy test. We'll be first developing an LDT, and that's simple mass spec. We have a series of biomarkers and algorithms around those that appear to be quite prognostic for things like ectopic pregnancy and preeclampsia. And currently there are no standard tests for that other than transvaginal ultrasound, which, is not exactly a do it at home kind of thing. So we want to get the LDT process going probably in the next couple of weeks and move forward on that one. But in the meantime, we will also then be developing an at-home test kit. We'll come back to the POC, but the at-home test kit will be an upgraded pregnancy test that also has risk factors assessments built into it, but also much more around the more holistic care of the test taker, regardless of the situation that they're in, understanding their emotional psyche, being able to provide information about nearby clinics, physician referrals, OBGYN referrals, education about what is ectopic pregnancy, what are preeclampsia, because they may not know. So we're trying to create toolings that can be done at home much more cost effectively, giving people access to information earlier and more holistic information that they could take advantage of to make the decisions that are going to be crucial for them, regardless of the path that they take. This will also include, hey, we're going to maintain our pregnancy, we're going on with that, great. Let's educate you about healthier diets. There are actually what I'll call it like the Hello Freshes for pregnant moms to have healthier diets while they're incubating this new child. There's also prenatal vitamins and things like that. There's baby registries. There's all kinds of things that can become revenue streams here as well. And we think we've already heard actually that this will be very, very interesting to, the CVSs and the Walgreens of the world, because, not only are they interested in having these better products that can be used earlier and provide more information. Well, if you diagnose ectopic pregnancy early enough, then methotrexate works to evacuate from the tubule, and the person won't require surgery. It doesn't become an issue of life and death. They're not showing up in the emergency room like the vast majority who don't have OBGYNs. They show up in the emergency room and they find out, crap, I'm going to lose that tubule. So they have to have a surgical procedure, and now they've lost 50% of ever getting pregnant in the future too. So we want to be able to save, the entire industry significant amounts of revenue and loss, but also people pain and stress over it by providing a more educated platform for them to understand, where do I go from here? So those types of things I think are going to still have significant investment here in 2025. Our assay, we can also create a point of care device as well. So if you are under the care of an OBGYN or you got that result off of the at-home test kit, you can then go to an OBGYN that's yours or one that we've referred to you, and then potentially the confirmatory assay will be done also in the physician's office or the clinic or whatever. So it still reduces the overall cost to the overall industry, right? That you're reducing the number of late-term surgeries that you have to do in order to rectify the situations.
Point of care is something we hear a lot in terms of at the moment, in terms of a lot of hype and a lot of positivity around that. In your opinion, why is the investment and excitement in IVD dropping? And do you see that is a trend that will continue, or are we set to see more investment and excitement come back into that in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think from the in vitro diagnostic, there are specific areas that I think are still poised to be very interesting, and that those are obviously genomic-based assays, liquid biopsies, things like that. But the overall market, because of the regulatory climate, it appears to be more challenging right now with the IVD within the IVD space. That I think people are going to pick and choose what will be faster, what has a faster ROI, what's going to have the lowest amount of regulatory hurdles moving forward. So, I don't think it's a permanent thing with the IVD side of things. I think it's just something that is we have to grin and deal with it right now. I think eventually things will pick up again. At least we like to think so. But from the overall investor perspective, while we still see a significant number of deals, just like 2024 and just like the year before, the amount taking the vast majority of those investment deals, has, might have been 15% of all companies took 80% of all the deal monies that year, right? And now we're down to probably 8 to 10% are taking the vast majority of the deals, 50, 60, 70% of the overall deal making. So I think it's predictive that the investors are extremely cautious right now. And I think they're also looking much more for, call it like a safety in numbers kind of, approach to things. So they're looking to build multiples of syndicates, of investors, with, I'll say enough, dry powder monies to weather what's coming
Right.
forward.
So they're trying to spread their bets and
Yeah.
and team up
Yep.
to
Yep.
yeah,
Exactly.
interesting. Are
Exactly.
you seeing um along the sort of life cycle of a new, whether it's diagnostics or therapeutics, are you seeing more interest at a certain phase compared to say 24 months ago in terms of companies either arriving at, or sorry, investors arriving at seed versus Series A, Series B, etc.? Are investors more interested in getting in early, or are they looking for more stability, proof of concept before they're getting in at the moment?
Yeah, I think this one kind of remains to be seen because we are just about to start the fundraise on our diagnostic play here. The other ones I've been doing fundraising for are therapeutics in the ocular space, in the cancer space. I had one in the neuro space and a couple of biotechnology products. So I think I might be able to answer that better in, say, the next month or so to understand whether that is the case or not. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you on that one. I do think there are
Yeah.
certain parts of diagnostic that, I think some people say, when things are cautious, sometimes like, I might have gone in with, an investment of, say, $1 million before, and now they're like, well, you know, I can do 200. I can do 200,000. So they might look for those seed opportunities where before they were looking for bigger, more tested, vetted types of opportunities because they're playing with a smaller pool of funds right now that they're willing to invest. So they might get in earlier, thinking they have more control or
Yeah.
access to the decision makers versus sitting as an LP around the table where you only get to talk to the CEO every month or every quarter. So
Yeah.
you might see that kind of play out in the next year or so. But it kind of remains to be seen. You don't really have
Yeah,
what.
it's interesting. I think I can't remember who I was in conversation with recently, but it was around how a lot of VCs are reserving so much of their capital for companies they're already invested in and topping up,
Yeah.
later rounds and sort of doubling down on the
Yep.
ones that are now starting to come back to them with,
Yep.
whether it's initial commercial success, especially in diagnostics where you have this LDT route, and maybe they now have the ability to show commercial success through the LDT setup in their own clear lab, that they're coming back and saying, okay, we've now got more commercial proof of concept, more data.
Yeah.
We just need topping up. And there's a lot of VCs saying that's a much better place for us to put our capital with a company that's a known entity. We've been there on the journey with them.
Yeah.
Than something more speculative that is, pure, hopes and wishes.
Yeah.
But not literally, obviously, but less speculation. It feels like there's a bit of a trend there at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I was going to say the same thing. They are doubling down on their existing investments to ensure that they can weather through the next several years. They owe that already to their existing LPs around the table. So for them, there's a lot of pressure on the VC to make sure that those current investments stay viable. Even if they built another round, they may not be dispensing that round recently. They may not be doing that for some time until they understand better what the industry is what's going to happen in the next, say, few months or so, as everything from the tariffs and what have you, political infighting with different nations. I think the VCs they're in a wait and see mode for those, and they'll say, okay, we're just going to focus on our existing things to make sure that they're still viable. Because if those belly up, that also just it decimates their reputation as well. Even though they can say, hey, this is due to politics and this is due to the current socioeconomic climate. But the reality is, their new funds will be more challenging to raise if the current ones don't survive. So they're really doubling down their efforts on those at this point in time.
So, Dean, when you're in those conversations where the macroeconomics are in forcing investors to have more caution and wait it out, are them conversations also balanced with wait it out for 12 months or 6 months or 20? Like, is there that element of we are waiting it out, but we believe the macroeconomic situation will be better in 2026, or are they wait it out, that's our strategy until we decide to change?
So this has actually come up quite a number of times, especially before and during bio, in meetings I was having with folks. And what we are seeing is they don't want. I mean, they'd love to be able to say, by 2026 we'll be good.
Yeah.
But a large number of the VCs I spoke to are moving their eyes across the pond to do investments in Europe, where before they weren't doing so much of that. They're looking at the opportunities over there as more stable. Europe has put up the green flag for business, open for business. They're trying to attract scientists. They're offering real estate at a fraction of the cost. So move your company here, start your company here. They're dossiering all the available grants to folks if they come to Germany, come to France, come to the UK. So the VCs are quite aware of this, and they're looking at those opportunities to say, this might be the next go-to for us for the time being, is to look at companies that might be a little more challenging for us to stay atop of because they're across the pond, but it's not impossible. It's a small pond, so getting over there and understanding what is going on and having your day-to-days. I think gone is a little bit of the day where I remember VCs telling me, look, if I have a slow afternoon, I like to just show up at 5 of my companies, walk in and say, hey, show me the latest data, right? Where are we with these investments? I had one VC, I won't say who it was and which firm, but a large player, it told me one day, he goes, look, I like to tell my CEOs, call them up and say, be in my office in 30 minutes, right? You can do that if you're in Boston, Cambridge. You can do that if you're a VC and your office is, in San Francisco and your company's in South San Francisco. You can do that. You can do that in San Diego. If it's across the pond, a little more challenging to do. But it's not impossible. And I think at this point, many of them will sit there and say, yeah, we'll just set up a local office in Zurich or London or, whatever. And we'll just, manage our investments out there and, pop in, hop on quick flights or trains. Everything, it's easy to get around over there. I think that's going to be, we're going to see a lot more of that in the next 6 months, from VC groups that they're playing much more internationally with the opportunities, especially if things continue under, I'll call it the non-favorable towards science positions here that we're seeing in this country right now. I think we're going to see the VCs say, we're going to go where the business is.
Yeah.
The opportunity for
Well,
growth. So.
this is coming up in conversations a lot around. Obviously, the interest rates in Europe are down at like 1.5% now. I think they've dropped interest rates 9 times since the peak. Whereas obviously the Fed is under a lot of pressure at the moment from the current administration, obviously, to do something. But the US and actually the UK are lagging on the interest rates coming down compared to the
Yeah.
EU have been incredibly aggressive.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
but surely, I mean, that, in 12 months' time, that could actually look very different where the US may well have caught up, but it remains to be seen.
Yep. Yep.
I also heard the same story about the Middle East, where there is a lot of capital available.
Yes.
There's a lot of government-driven initiatives that, especially around diagnostics, where they want to provide cutting-edge, innovative technology that can help them address topics of, whether it's mental health and being able to, to identify these things early for their populations. And they are saying to US-based diagnostics companies that are, at an LDT stage, come here, bring all your science here, launch a lab here, and if you do that, we'll also invest in your next round and so
Right.
forth. And there's a lot of capital that's being driven by the government because it's part of the initiatives that they want around healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely correct. A friend of mine did launch his company over in the Middle East. So, yeah, and he's a Frenchman. He lives out in California, but they gave him so much. I'll just call it free money and lab space for a year, an existing pool of talent at the university, which was right outside the gate of the life science park that they had built over there. So for him, this is a great way for us to generate the data that we need to move the next step forward. And of course, the wealth of the Middle East, had I'll call it a right to first refusal on investing. So for him, that's a win-win. If you've already got interested parties, you're generating the data and they're aware that you've generated the data. They've seen you work over the last 12 months to generate that data, and like, great, I vetted you. So they're ready to move forward those. So I think you're right. I think we're going to see the Middle East also play a much more aggressive role in taking advantage of the current situation out here and pitching to life science people to get their companies launched over there. So, I think it's an option for a significant number of companies. It's not an option for all, for sure. But it is something that is worth considering if you're in the growth stage right now, trying to get that company launched. Even if you're just in the seed stage, if you could do what he did that I just mentioned, you have the opportunity to generate a significant amount of data in a we'll call it a friendly climate, and generate the data you need for that next round. Take them up on it if it's available.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, when you get involved in early stage companies who are looking for support with fundraising, what are the sort of common mistakes that you see from founders early on as they sort of try to approach fundraising? Is there sort of recurring themes of how they've approached it, or their lack of knowledge, or their, what's the sort of typical challenges that you come across when you first get introduced to them?
Yeah, interesting. There are a number, and there's the historical one that everybody always talks about. Where the company comes off as really just an academic project, right? And this was something I worked on when I was in university, and I think that every VC should be interested in this. The problem is it's not much more than a publication of data. And it's not a company, and investors invest in teams. They invest in teams that have clear goals for moving the asset or the concept forward. And that whole thing is often lacking. I've companies is like, oh, we don't need a website. I'm like, the reality is you put your information out. The very first place someone is going to try to go is to look it up online. If they don't find your information up there, or at least a teaser about what it is that you're doing, and in a clear and concise fashion, they're not going to consider you. So, I say they're simple mistakes. Unfortunately, they're kind of redundant. I mean, I've been talking with companies for 25 years about the same stuff, and they, a lot of them still do this. It doesn't cost you anything to get a website up these days, right? It's not nothing like it was. I think the first website I built, way back when, it was like $40,000 back then.
Yeah.
I mean, just absolutely crazy. And now you can do the vast majority of it with AI and have it look pretty good. And you can get a couple of a designer person that'll go help out with the fine tuning and adjustments of things, just to kind of tweak it closer towards perfection and get that thing hosted. But going back to the teams thing, I think that is absolutely crucial. Is having not just a well-rounded team where it's not just like a bunch of 3 people from the lab is not a team.
Right.
You need people that have business experience. You need, even if you don't have someone, that's doing your numbers for you, just get a fractional CFO. Even if he says, look, there's not much to do here right now. We're still seed stage, but I want you to take a look at our, excuse me, our numbers. Make sure they look good. We want to put together at least an initial cap table. Even if the cap table doesn't really plug in until we have some investments coming in, at least it's clear. We're showing them a clear, concise pathway forward towards success. That's what they want, even at the seed stage. They're expecting that these simple things that were really hard 30 years ago, but not so hard today to pull in and create is in play. And I also think, this is an area that people often do as an afterthought, and that is, aligning yourself with a good board. So, commercial board as well as a scientific advisory board. Clear roles and expectations for both. But if you can get folks that are willing to come on board, even though you're pre-funded, and they're willing to put their name and their reputation on what it is that you're building, that adds street cred to what it is that you're trying to get them to believe in as investors.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think there is enough resources out there to teach scientists, technologists, those founders who, as you say, may well have picked up something from their academic institution that they were previously part of, maybe they're still associated with, they've privatized, they're doing the research and development, they're getting close to where they want it to be to sort of start taking the next stage. Is there enough resources for those founders to help them understand how to run a business and how to make it look like a business?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really important part of the solution that I think a lot of companies don't take advantage of. And it's one thing if you're trying to launch a company in, say, Boston, Cambridge, right? I mean, you've got Mass Challenge, you have the CIC, you've got all these different accelerator programs and incubator programs that you can get in, sometimes for free, sometimes for very, very low cost, and then you get access to their free talent pools and people that can help advise you on how to build a cap table, how to build a website,
Yeah.
how to do a pitch, and they run these regular pitch sessions. So you end up standing up there over and over and over again, giving your pitch, fine tuning it. You know, you're getting real time feedback from people that have done this over and over and over again. And you know, I talk to folks all the time. I said, you know, you might have given your scientific pitch in front of, you know, the Department of Cell Biology of Harvard, where you did your science. That's entirely different than giving a company pitch. And
Yeah.
so attend as many of these as you can, give as many of these as you can, learn from them. And when you hear the feedback coming from the panels that usually review these live, you get great take homes for yourself. But even as they're talking about these other companies that pitch, you're like, oh, this investor really liked this piece. This, you know, business leader really liked this aspect of that guy's pitch or the gal's pitch. You know, you do the same, and you keep updating how you present your materials and how you parlay the vision that you have for this organization. So I don't think they as many take advantage as they should.
Yeah.
A little bit more challenging when you're really in a remote location. They might have, you know, a business school that runs, you know, events every now and then or things like that in the nearby area. But that's when the online available tools can play an even bigger role. And there are groups online where you are doing pitches, right? So participate in those, give a pitch and get real-time feedback. Watch your recording of yourself over and over and over again till you get to the point where you're like, wow, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't say, you know, things in that way. I don't think that it probably didn't come off as clear as I would have liked. Or, you know, all of a sudden the crowd went, you know, you want to understand that. So they can take advantage of a lot of, you know, free tools and groups and get real-time feedback. I would also say, though, just make sure that you vet the group to make certain that it is legit and the people reviewing it have enough experience to give that feedback back to you. But you know, I would say just for the companies today, you could do that. You can get as close to perfect pitching and as design of your
Yeah.
presentation for no cost at all. Do it. Take advantage of that. Even before you do your lot, you know, join an incubator, accelerator type of program where you've got to fork over, you know, maybe $300 to $600 a month just to, you know, more of a pay to play. But at that point now you're walking in, you're just really fine tuning, and you're getting the introductions to investors, you're getting the introductions to other, you know, potential C-suite partners and things like that.
That's awesome. It's out there for the people that are open-minded and want to go get it.
Yep, absolutely correct. Great point, David.
Just as we wrap this up, optimistic about the future of the diagnostics market?
I am more optimistic about the diagnostics market as a whole than many other parts of the life science industry, for sure. You know, I think in the therapeutic space, it's still kind of hit or miss of, you know, getting in front of the right individuals. And I think pharma, you know, you were hoping for a specific pharma to in-license your asset at some point in time. Again, field posts have moved. That can be more challenging still. So depending on the therapeutic, unless it was clearly like 50% of the organization was focused on this specific disease or indication, and we have a real novel approach to solving that.
Yeah.
Unless you have that, and you're trying to convince somebody where maybe 5% or 10% of the company overall organizational interest is in this specific therapeutic area. So it's really important as a founder or C-suite to, you know, really understand who it makes sense to pitch to at any point in time. Because I think it's going to be a real challenge for the therapeutics folks. I think from the diagnostic side of things, especially from, I would say more from the investor side. I mean, there's a right now, I think there's a strategic demand for diagnostics from payers and providers and things like that, as well as biopharma companies, for them to put some monies and some efforts into that space right now, because payers want to be able to diagnose something early so treatment is more cost effective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to discover you got a stage 3 pancreatic cancer,
Right.
right? Diagnostics in pancreatic cancer have been horribly unsuccessful. We need focused effort to figure this stuff out earlier. Other tests, whether it is liquid biopsy for specific biomarkers for specific cancer types, being able to discover those cancers before it's a full raging tumor, requiring, massive surgery and long hospital stays, and also that maybe phase 1 treatments would actually work, or first round therapies would actually work. So the payers want it to happen. I think the hospitals want it to happen, and I think investors, that should resonate for them to pay specific attention to the demand from them, and biopharma companies for that matter too, right? Being able to have the right set of markers to not only find that your patient has that specific indication, but then to track that patient and the treatment of the success treatments down there. When you go into trial, the last thing you want to do is go into clinical trial and you end up with a data set that's inconclusive, because you just didn't really have a good understanding of both the markers for assessing therapeutic success, but you also didn't have clear patient classification going into the clinic, right? So you want to know, this is the patient pool that we are targeting here. And even if it is narrow, I think most investors and I think most pharma would rather say, I would prefer to have a 90% success rate in this small pool versus a 30% success rate in this big pool,
Right.
Because the latter is going to be really hard to get an FDA stamp of approval on, or
That's awesome.
or any regulatory agency.
Thanks for that, Dean. Dean, thank you for your time today. This has
Absolutely.
been incredible to hear your perspective, so unique and so thorough. A load of really sort of specific highlights there, but also optimism in the future of the market, and that's great to hear. But thank you again for your time.
No, it was a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you on this one here, and hopefully we get we're able to get the fire under the backsides of specific individuals that should be funding some of these opportunities, and we also motivate founders to get their due diligence and their pitches and everything more operationally enabled. So appreciate the time, David. As always, great talking with you.